what is joint hypermobility and why does it matter? So joint hypermobility simply means that a joint or a group of joints has greater than average range of motion. And this is as you would expect for that person's age and sex, etc. So it's important to know that joint hypermobility is quite common. And some people, of course, will always be above average, so that makes sense. But we want to think about connective tissue variance. Does somebody have a variant in their connective tissue that makes their body be put together in a way that's different from other people? And so it's best to, I wish I could show you a goniometer, but probably a number of you have had your joint range of motion measured with a goniometer. And that is the best way to tell if a joint is moving either passively or actively beyond the normal physiologic limits. And a very common thing that you can actually see quite visibly is knee recurvatum. That's where someone's knees hyperextend. People also can call that back knee. There are some advantages to having hypermobile joints. For example, in certain aesthetic arts, there are advantages. For example, in dance, particularly in classical ballet. It also can be advantageous for musicians and some athletes as well. So it is more prevalent among aesthetic artists and athletes. In fact, there are some studies that show that amongst pre-professional ballet dancers, like up to 90% of people have at least some hypermobile joints. And we know that hypermobile joints can be either inherited or acquired, and they can also be forced. So, for example, you might have normal knee range of motion, but something that I hear a lot happening is people, they might be in the splits in some kind of like gymnastics or dance or something, and then the person pushes down on their front leg. That pushes their knee into hyperextension. So that's an instance that a person might have forced joint hypermobility. And some people are not only asymptomatic with joint hypermobility, but they may remain that way for their entire life. I personally believe that this is probably fairly rare, but it definitely does happen. Sometimes you run into people who are, for example, in their 70s or something, and they still have some hypermobile joints, but they've never had any problems with it. If someone is younger, of course, we don't know if they're going to develop problems or not. And so some people may be asymptomatic for a long time. Other people will develop symptoms. And joint hypermobility is not the same thing as flexibility. Flexibility is a function of the joint range of motion and the muscle length and neural tension. You can have hypomobility, meaning that your joints have less than average range of motion, but you can be flexible because your muscles, you're able to relax your muscles and be able to stretch into that range of motion that you do have. Or you can actually be hypermobile and actually be inflexible because your joints have a range of motion that's greater than normal, but your muscles are so tight and are trying to protect the joint, so you therefore don't have the ability to actually stretch into what would otherwise be your normal range of motion. Joint laxity or mechanical instability is not the same thing as joint hypermobility, but they can be they definitely can co-occur, or you can have one or the other. So joint laxity, or neither, of course, joint laxity is the objective measure of a joint to move passively beyond normal limits during accessory motion. And basically what this means is that a joint has difficulty staying in proper alignment. So, and there's certain manual tests that we do for this. And oftentimes people will use joint hypermobility, joint laxity, and instability as synonymous, but they're not synonymous. And this is also not a new phenomenon, although it may seem like it. Back in the early 1900s, it was described as a child with congenital hip dislocation, which we now know is something that is more common in people that have vascular EDS, for example. And joint instability is probably actually more important than joint hypermobility or the range of motion, but it's harder to screen for and quantify, whereas the joint hypermobility is easier to see. Functional instability is different from mechanical instability in that this is a subjective or self-report, and a person will report that they have a mistrust or insecurity that their joint will remain intact even under low force conditions. So, for example, their joint could sublux, or give way or dislocate. They could feel like that's happening.